Hey guys, welcome back to the Season 8 finale of the Far Better Podcast. I am your host, Michael Clark, and it's time to tell you what's coming next. All season long, we've been talking about quitting and knowing when to quit. For example, we did that with Wayne in episode 1, knowing when it's time to quit running from opportunity, knowing when it's time to quit running from the obligations that we have, from the obedience that is required of us, from complaining about others and leadership and murmuring and disputing in general, by quitting listening to error, ignoring error, accepting error, and teaching error, by quitting, and knowing what that means and how we handled that with Haste and Hanley, by quitting the immaturity in our lives by having better word and conversations, by quitting the immaturity and staying in the same place and talking with Joe Mallory, by quitting immaturity in charity and spirit when we talked with Brennan, when we talked about quitting immaturity with Justin Johnson. We talked for 3 episodes with Joe Wells about the series that he did on his podcast, The Hey Joe Show, where he discovered some intricate details pertaining to pornography. And now for the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about why I'm quitting. And this is why I'm quitting. And let me give you the reason. I don't know how much you've noticed, but for the last few seasons, I have done every 3rd episode, basically, of my arc, because I like to do 3-episode arcs. And I've pretty much done every 3rd episode has been text takeaways. And I have done text takeaways now for several seasons, honestly. I've done them for the yield time, really from season 5 all the way up to now. I have been doing that for 2 years. And as I got to thinking about what I wanted to do next and what was the most important thing to me, it was to announce that January 1st, 2026 will be the beginning of a new era. This podcast itself will not be going anywhere. We're going to change the name of it and the, graphic. And all of the older episodes will be differentiated with the words Far Better in them and the bracketed name that we've done sometimes, as you've seen on the master feed. And so if you're listening to the Far Better Podcast next year when we do our series finale, you don't have to unsubscribe and go look for a new show of mine. You can stay right where you're at, and text takeaways will begin. Let me give you a little bit of a background into text takeaways. So basically, it was around, 2018 or 19 maybe. And I began to notice that I felt like my preaching wasn't very application-based. Wasn't as good as it could have been in that department. And so I started to do a different style of preaching for me. I went from having a 3-point sermon and then trying to conclude everything we've been talking about in the final paragraph to predominantly 2-point sermons, and then the 3rd point being called application. And we would spend, 10, sometimes 15 minutes just in the application part, making sure that people understood that what we had been talking about mattered, that there was a purpose for us today. And as I continued to do that, I thought, I don't like how application sounds. It's too on the nose, it's obvious. And as a preacher, you don't want to be the type of preacher that you feel like when you're doing these things, you're giving people the cue to start wrapping it up, pack up the Bible. He's finishing, he's doing his conclusion. So I changed it to lessons learned. And we did lessons learned for a while, and I didn't hate that. But then somewhere along the way, I just started calling them text takeaways, and I liked that better. It is an opportunity to consider what the text is truly saying, what the text is trying to get across and convey. And I love that. It has encouraged me in preaching. It has changed the way that I outline. It's changed the way that I view Scripture in a mindset of, instead of trying to read verse by verse and just make that verse in front of me make sense, what does this verse maybe say that would be a good text takeaway? And so I'm announcing that beginning in 2026, Text Takeaways will be my podcast on Wednesdays, same place, same time, same host. And I'm going to begin a study through the Bible. You know, I learned that it was a lot easier to try to write a portion of Text Takeaways based off of 5 verses or 10 verses, or even longer than that, and stretching it over a few weeks, than trying to write an entire sermon that I could then break down into 15-minute segments. I just didn't want to do that anymore. It wasn't something that was feasible for me. So I'm excited to announce that Text Takeaways will begin in January of 2026. And here's something else. It will be a video podcast as well. And I am really looking forward to that. It has been a long time since I have recorded TV programs like that. And the Memphis School of Preaching has a wonderful studio setup. And in part, we have designed and are making it, at the time that I'm recording this in August, we're designing this studio to be able to also do one-person shoots as well. And the goal is to be able to just sit down in the studio, press a button, and go. And so I want you to be encouraged to be looking out for Text Takeaways in January of 2026. And I want to encourage you to hang on for 2 more seasons with me on the Scatter the Broad Network under this podcast that has changed my life. Please God now, so our eternity can be far better. See you in about a week.